Well, if there's anything Nigeria needs now, it is to unite a people sharply divided post-2023. And this is why former President Obasanjo is championing a national reconciliation. But how can this be achieved? What are the modalities of getting this national reconciliation work? Well, joining us live on Newsline to look at this is Hamzat Lawal, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Connected Development, otherwise called CODE. And from our offsite studio, we have Ezenwa Nwangwu, Chairman, Partners for Electoral Reform. Let's start by welcoming you, Hamzat, and good to see you, and thanks for your time as always. Quickly here, the issue of reconciliation first. What should be the first thing to, look out for as a people who are set to reconcile a pained moment, especially after an election?
Hamza?
Oh, happy Good Friday. I think first is that people still have open wounds, and this is backdated from the Civil War. You see, you can't have a national reconciliation when people are not allowed to speak and air their grievances. Yes, I agree that to reconcile, we must have dialogues. Probably start with regional conversation and have a national conversation centered around peace, unity, and national cohesion. So for us to reconcile, first we must agree and recognize the fact that there was a civil war that displaced many, that killed many, and people still have that wound open. And government needs to take responsibility by acknowledging, and then people would heal from it. See, I had just returned from Rwanda, and in Kigali, I visited the monument site, after that massacre. What the government did was to document this and recognize it, and then so people can learn from their history. So for us to reconcile, we must learn from our history, document it properly, acknowledge it, and then people will start to heal from that wound. But first, allow them to even have a conversation and protect and provide that safe space for this kind of conversation.
Ezenwa, let me bring you in here. Well, based on what former President Olusegun Obasanjo said, that Nigeria has never been more divided than ever, and that it's even more divided than we thought in the first place. Would you even say that there was ever a time when Nigeria was truly a united country? It was Awolowo that once said that Nigeria is a mere geographical expression. Why have we not been able to become that one united Nigeria?
Well, I think first is to situate the fact that one of the challenges or the tragedy of public commentary in Nigeria is when people who are themselves problems start to pose a solution. The man you are referring to, President Obasanjo, was the one who laid the foundation for this democracy and ran 8 years of government. I didn't see how much of what he's currently pushing he did. He had the opportunity, having transited from military rule, to lay the basis for this kind of conversation. But he exacerbated the fault lines in very near irreparable ways. He needs to reconcile with the people of Odi. He needs to reconcile with the Zakibian people. He needs also to reconcile with the many families that, some of the families that were gruesomely murdered through political assassinations when he presided over the country. And so if we're going to have reconciliation, yes, Hamza is talking about civil war and all that, but there has been platforms of engagement that should have pushed us to that point. So subsequent leadership in the country have paid lip service to unity. They only canvass this when they are out of government. It's like when you hear them talk about restructuring. The restructuring mantra only gains currency when they are out of government. When they are in government, they fester those wounds and exacerbate it. So for me is to say clearly that we need to first agree that at what point is this not an elite construction? The whole idea about disunity is more about privileges, cronyism, and patronage. It has nothing deep-rooted. When I travel to Umuaron in Kwara State, for instance. My Igbo-ness does not come out. What comes out is that I'm a human being. People relate with me. But from the point I start talking about wanting to contest for office or wanting to assert my rights, then it is the elites themselves who eventually then begin to pull these issues and make them look. So for me, it's really artificial. And why is he talking about reconciliation now? This is a man who himself has been unpresidential, unstatesmanly. He has thrown his heart into the ring in a period when he should ordinarily have maintained a situation in which he can be the one now pulling all of this together. So I really, like I said before, problems cannot pose a solution.
Now, because listening to Nwangwu there, it tells a picture of people who have also contributed to the problem. But again, in trying to run away from that, we must assure Nigerians that there is need for healing. There is need for some kind of acceptability, as Hamzat painted earlier. We must accept that people have been bruised, wounded, and are also in pain. So Hamzat, I'm excited you spoke about Rwanda. We also understand that that country had the justice and reconciliation process, which has worked for that African nation. Paint for us a picture of what you have in mind, given that some of the key concerns, as painted by Ezenwa, will mean that we will need people who have not been partakers of injustice in the country's history.
Well, I think that we can even come home to learn. See, in Plateau State, they have a peace and reconciliation agency, and they have a day committed for national forgiveness. I was even invited for the last one just a few months ago. And I witnessed how they've been able to put away their differences. And that's why you don't see a lot of, negative news about killings in Plateau State that was heated just a few years ago. Yeah. That's on one side. But I also think that we're misdiagnosing even the problem itself. Right. This is about economics. This is about distribution of wealth and power. That is the crux of the matter, because people are feeling aggrieved because when it comes to power and wealth, a lot of people have been marginalized. So that's where the ethnicity and the religious rhetorics come into play. And then the identity crisis now will become escalated. I think that our religious and traditional body has a unique role to play. And I agree with, Ezenwa. Maybe we need the Sultan of Sokoto. We need Father Onaiko or Bishop Kuka to lead this kind of conversation. I think the politicians have failed us. They failed us too many times. And let's not trust that, there is no interest behind the campaign led by the former president. Let's have a neutral body and neutral people who have values that has helped Nigeria grow as a country and as a nation. Lead this kind of conversation and provide...
what kind of interest could he have? I mean, it's like we're shooting down shooting the messenger and not really focusing on his message, which is, can we heal Nigeria? Can we reconcile Nigeria? You are saying, Hamzat, that we have lost trust in the politicians. So how do we begin? Where do we start this reconciliation and national healing from?
You see, one thing as a society that we fail to realize is we don't only have political leaders. Each and every one of us are leaders. And we have a role to play in nation building. And first, we need to recognize that in our little unit, if we have this conversation and then converge in a larger scale. But first, you must agree that you would create a platform where people will feel safe to air their views and their grievance, and where we'll be tolerant to listen and learn. Not to, again, like you said, throw away the messenger and the message. But for me, I believe that first, we must, as a people, tolerate ourselves, create an avenue for this kind of conversation. Yes, as much as we've lost trust from our political leaders, it must also be led by people who have legitimacy, people who have power, and who have the collective will of the Nigerian state. We have a president-elect. I think that this should be led by the incoming government, where they would recognize and accept that there is a problem, and this problem needed to be dealt with, so that whatever recommendation comes out of it, so it does not become a case of the national confab that is just gathering dust in some shelf.
Okay, let's bring in Ezenwa very quickly. OBJ, not just, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, not just talking about the need to reconcile and to heal the nation. He goes ahead to actually give us an idea of how this should happen. He says, and I quote, "This must be done in sync with the imperative of national value orientation that Nigeria requires to build a collective sense of enduring and local values and national belonging." End quote. Ezenwa, if you look at what President Olusegun Obasanjo has said here, he's talking about national values. Do we even have one to start with? And what are they, and how can that be the platform on which we can begin to build this reconciliation and healing?
Ngozi, I think we are heavy on cliches and mantra and all of those things. The National Orientation Agency exists for the purpose of national reorientation, and part of it is the core values of patriotism, honesty, transparency, and all of those issues that it talks about. But I think what we need to do is to have a leadership audit across the zones. Whether anybody wants it or not, since 1999, people who are in the National Assembly have had, especially from when this same President Obasanjo, he started giving constituency projects. Those constituency projects have nothing to do with whether you are from the South, whether you are Igbo, you're Yoruba, or you're Hausa. What is important is that there has not been a leadership audit. These monies get into these places and they are not used for the betterment of the people. So when we make a cliche and build all this mantra that President Obasanjo likes to bandy around, and what we need to do is to say, how is the life for the ordinary person in Kaura Namoda? How is the ordinary person in Ilejemeje? How is the person feeling in Auchi in Edo State? The ordinary people of Nigeria, they have been governed by their own indigenes. Monies have been appropriated to them. They have governors from their state. Those governors are not foreigners. So the point is that we have not been able to engage in leadership audits in a way that produces the kind of outcomes that we want. In the states, for instance, especially Southeast now, the whole idea of unknown government and all of that have made it difficult to even hold government accountable. Every money that is allocated to that part of the country has become security votes. And so in that system, there is no civil society, nobody is doing budget tracking, nobody is holding anybody. You can't go on online and get the budget of any of the states, its performance. So if we build these intangibles, as important as they are, we need citizen action as the new government emerges to hold those we have elected from our own place accountable, not just people from outside. We enjoy what is far away. Everybody talks about federal. The subnational governments are emperors. Nobody challenges them. Nobody holds them accountable. My minister, the minister who represents me from Imo State, was there when the livestock transformation agenda project was put on ground. It was called Ruga. Ruga had no tribal marks on it. Did he come bring it down to the people of my state to say, you can draw from this and benefit your people in terms of milk or cattle production? So the challenge therefore is we must play citizen active role in holding government accountable and leave these fault lines that people like Obasanjo continue to blow up.
Let me jump in here, and this is to you, Ezenwa, quickly here, because 5 years ago, specifically March 2018, we saw what happened in Kenya, now known as the handshake between the then president Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. They all came publicly to have that handshake and asked for forgiveness, and it went down all their followers until this moment. Even now, they're still trying to go back to that handshake after the last election. Let us say now, Hamzat has said, set the ball to how we can go about this. Let's come back to how we can go about this if we can actually start to wind down. How do we go about this? Looking at the various leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, and so many other leaders that we can actually bring on the pedestal and bring about this national healing. Ezenwa.
Well, for me, is we need to shun, the fabulists. The fabulists are all over the place. Before this election, people exaggerated their reach, and everything that played up has shown the fact that we are now talking about reconciliation, giving the impression that there were people who perhaps have been hurt by the fact of this election. When people lose election, there is still a process. The electoral process does not end in election. It ends until there is a judicial adjudication. And until that happens, we won't say there has not been, healing and all of that. The role of the judiciary is to engage these issues that we are talking about, especially the fallouts from the electoral process. After all that is done, and there are still people who feel hurt, then the new government can set up a mechanism for reconciliation, for reaching out, for building a national government that can take in, because at the end of the day, the politicians are not talking what we are talking. They are talking about patronage and cronyism. At the end of the day, it is not about whether Nigeria is going to move forward, whether the fault lines will be healed. It is about themselves, their families, and what they are doing. Look at the type of government we've been running in the last 40 years. What kind of government have we been running? Is one, Obasanjo started monetization, privatization, deregulation, all the commercial regulations and all the rest of it. What has it brought for the ordinary people of Nigeria? Where have we built houses for the poor? What hospitals did he build? He met National Hospital. He sold those, they sold all that asset that our common patrimony brought for us. So we need to engage in a more ideological conversation about how do we want to govern our country. If we do that, we will be able to take away all of this and then move to real issues that we can discuss. Very quickly, Hamzat, you have the last one. Look, there's been federal character, there's NYSC, zoning, and all of that to, bring about that sense of belonging. The next administration, Obasanjo has kicked the ball to them, saying, look, this is what you need to do. Where do they need to start from?
Well, I think first, we need the government that starts to rebuild trust. And to rebuild trust, and in rebuilding trust, a lot of them made campaign promises. And in achieving those campaign promises, it has to do with the budget. So how much are you putting in healthcare, in education? Because this collectively affects every Nigerian. How much are you putting to ensure that also you have a government that has a gap between male and female, so gender equality, also youth representation. So again, I believe to rebuild back that trust, we need a government that is honest to her own commitment, taking cue from their manifesto and their promises post-election.
Fantastic, very well said, both of you gentlemen. Hamzat Lawal, Connected Development, and of course, Ezenwa Nwangwu joining us tonight to look at how to reconcile and heal Nigeria.